March 15th, 44 BC. A fateful day. Julius Caesar, who had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon and declared himself dictator for life, was stabbed 23 times in the heart of the Roman Senate. It was not an enemy from the outside who did the killing. It was Caesar's friends, allies, senators whom he had once trusted. Brutus, who was considered his spiritual son, also participated in the assassination. A chilling quote is said to have been uttered, "You too, Brutus." Caesar died, but ambition did not die. His death did not bring peace, but opened the door to a bloody civil war. Who would succeed him? Who would become the new master of Rome? Two names soon stood out from the crowd: Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, a seasoned general, and Gaius Octavius, Octavian, Caesar's adopted nephew, whom Caesar officially named as his heir in his will. But they were not alone. To deal with the assassins, a new alliance was formed, the Second Triumvirate: Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus. They temporarily joined forces to hunt down their common enemy, Brutus and Cassius, the two masterminds of Caesar's assassination. In 42 BC, at Philippi, the two largest armies of the Roman Republic clashed. Antony and Octavian defeated the forces of Brutus and Cassius. Both committed suicide, but instead of peace, the victory ushered in a new era of suspicion and rivalry, because from here, the triumvirate began to crack. Octavian, ambitious, experienced politician. Antony, brave on the battlefield, but increasingly immersed in a luxurious life in the East. The seeds of division had begun. In 41 BC, when Mark Antony arrived in Tarsus, a wealthy city in Asia Minor, he did not just come to meet a political ally, he met his destiny. The woman was none other than the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra Sevem Philopator. Cleopatra was not only a symbol of beauty. She was intelligent, knew many languages, was good at politics, and most importantly, had a child with Caesar. Antony was conquered not only by her body, but by her mind. Gradually, Antony grew more and more distant from Rome. He lived with Cleopatra in Alexandria, in a splendid palace on the banks of the Nile. There they held lavish parties, indulged in wine, music, and dreams. The powerful couple had 3 children together, a son and 2 daughters. But that was not all. Antony began to grant Roman territory in the east to Cleopatra and her children. He gave Cyprus, Cilicia, Syria, and even much of Palestine. In the eyes of the Romans, this was an unforgivable betrayal. A Roman general who had sworn allegiance to the Senate now established his own court in the east, paying homage to a foreign queen, giving Roman lands to Egyptian blood. In Rome, Octavian did not waste the opportunity. He spread the news that Antony was no longer Roman, that he had been bewitched, controlled by an Oriental woman. He made Cleopatra a symbol of a threat to Roman purity and identity. In 34 BC, in a grand ceremony called the Donations of Alexandria, Antony publicly declared Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, to be Caesar's rightful heir. This was a slap in the face to Octavian, who had been adopted by Caesar as his legal son and sole heir in his will. The Roman people were furious. The Senate began to waver. Octavian knew the moment had come. To depose Antony, he needed a just cause, and Cleopatra was the perfect excuse. While Antony and Cleopatra were enjoying power and luxury in the East, in Rome, Octavian was secretly staging another war, a war of information, public opinion, and law. Octavian knew that to destroy Antony he needed more than just troops. He needed to get the Senate and the Roman people on his side, and so he played a tricky game. He claimed to have obtained Antony's secret will, kept in the temple of the Vestal Virgins. Although it was an illegal act, Octavian dared to risk it, because the contents, if true, were explosives. In the will, Antony recognized Caesarion as the legitimate son of Julius Caesar. This denied Octavian his right to inherit. But even more shocking, Antony declared, when he died, he wanted to be buried in Alexandria next to Cleopatra, not in Rome, where the Roman heroes rested. Octavian read each line aloud to the Senate and then spread it throughout Rome. He did nothing more. The whole city was in an uproar. To the Romans, it was treason. In 32 BC, the Senate declared Cleopatra an enemy of Rome. Antony, by allying with and serving Cleopatra, had also become a traitor. Octavian was given the ultimate authority to act against the Eastern threat, but in reality it was a civil war in disguise. The Romans would never allow fighting between their own countrymen, but fighting an Egyptian queen was perfectly reasonable. And so Octavian prepared for war, not only on land but at sea, where he had an absolute advantage thanks to his close friend and talented admiral, Marcus Agrippa. War was inevitable. All roads now led to one place, the Gulf of Actium, where the fate of Rome and the entire Mediterranean world would be decided. In 32 BC, the inevitable confrontation was taking place. Antony and Cleopatra had gathered their forces in the east, while Octavian, along with Marcus Agrippa, was preparing his fleet from the west. Antony, though a seasoned general, was at a disadvantage. His fleet consisted of some 230 ships, mostly quinqueremes, large, heavy, multi-tiered oars. But his troops were short of food, low in morale, and most of their forces came from eastern allies such as Egypt, Syria, Judea, rather than Rome. In contrast, Octavian's fleet, commanded by Agrippa himself, numbered only about 400 ships, but was lighter, more maneuverable, and equipped with catapults and sea-based siege engines. In addition, Octavian's Roman soldiers were all Italian citizens, elite, loyal, and backed by the entire Western Roman logistical base. Octavian's strategy was clear: not to strike quickly, but to blockade, cut off supply lines, and force the enemy into a state of exhaustion. Meanwhile, Agrippa made lightning attacks, seizing strategic points along the Greek coast, cutting Antony off from supply lines from Egypt. In Antony's camp, the situation was increasingly dire. Food was scarce, disease was widespread, and morale was low. Some units even deserted or secretly contacted Octavian. Cleopatra, pragmatic and perceptive, began to worry. She urged Antony, retreat to Egypt, retreat from Greece, wait for another opportunity. Antony had two choices: to hold out on land or to risk breaking the siege at sea and trying to retreat to the east. In the end, he chose the second option, risky but hopeful, to organize a decisive battle at sea. According to the plan, Antony would cut a bloody path through Agrippa's fleet, break the siege, and retreat to Egypt. Cleopatra, with the rear fleet, would wait for the signal to support and flee when the opportunity arose. But that was also the last gamble for both of them. September 2nd, 31 BC. In the Gulf of Actium, the two largest fleets of the Roman Republic faced each other. This was no longer just a naval battle, it was a choice between East and West, between Republic and tyranny, between a united Rome or a split forever. Dawn of September 2nd, 31st BC. In the Ionian Sea, off the west coast of Greece, hundreds of ships began to move into position. The Battle of Actium, one of the most important naval battles in the history of the Mediterranean, had begun. Antony arranged his fleet in a semicircle, blocking the mouth of the bay. His large, slow but powerful ships carried his last hope and his silent despair. Marcus Agrippa, the brilliant commander on Octavian's side, quickly saw the weakness. He did not engage head-on, but used lighter ships to surround and wear down Antony's fleet piece by piece. Antony's ships were too heavy to turn quickly. Meanwhile, Agrippa's ships were agile, attacking and retreating, creating a pincer movement from both sides. The wind and the tide also favored Octavian. When the fighting was at its fiercest, an unexpected event occurred. Cleopatra, with 60 Egyptian ships, suddenly broke away from the formation and fled south towards Egypt. Many believed it was part of a planned retreat, but to most Roman soldiers it was an act of treachery in the heat of the moment. Antony, seeing Cleopatra fleeing, abandoned his command and boarded a ship to chase her. Antony abandoned his fleet, abandoned his men, and in fact, abandoned the war. From that moment on, the Battle of Actium was no longer a battle, but a one-sided massacre. Antony's fleet was broken. More than 5,000 men were killed. Dozens of ships were burned or captured. Most of the remaining troops surrendered. One of the most powerful fleets in the Mediterranean was destroyed in a matter of hours. And so at Actium, not just a battle, but an era, the era of Roman civil wars, of generals fighting for glory, was over. An empire and an emperor was being forged in a sea of blood. After Actium, everything changed. There was no more civil war. There was no more worthy opponent. Only one man remained, Octavian, Caesar's heir, who was taking the final steps to become the ruler of all Rome. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt. Alexandria, the once glorious city, was now a desperate fortress. Cleopatra tried to raise money, strengthen the city, negotiate with Octavian, but all her efforts were in vain. Cleopatra, the last great queen of Ptolemaic Egypt, knew what was coming. Octavian advanced slowly but surely, besieging Alexandria, cutting off all avenues of retreat. In his despair, Antony believed that Cleopatra was dead. He did not want to live any longer. And so in his own palace in Alexandria, Marcus Antonius, who had been Julius Caesar's right-hand man, killed himself with a sword. Antony did not die alone. He died in the arms of Cleopatra, the woman on whom he had staked his life. It was the end of a love that was bloody, passionate, and tragic. Octavian entered Alexandria not as a general, but as a king. There was no need to fight, no need to kill. The city bowed before the victor. A few days later, Cleopatra retreated to the royal mausoleum. In a symbolic and decisive act, she chose death. According to legend, she let a poisonous snake, the asp, the symbol of Egypt, bite her hand, a death that was gentle like sleep. The Battle of Actium was not just the end of Antony and Cleopatra. It was the prelude to a new era, a world without Julius Caesar, without the Republic, but Augustus, the first emperor, and a Rome entering the age of the emperors. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next stories about the battles, dynasties, and people who shook the world. See you in the next video. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss the next stories about the battles, the dynasties, and the people who shook the world. See you in the next video.